First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to speak. This is, I schmoozed around here for an hour, and I think that this is an amazing event. And I do give a lot of talks in Israel for many years, but having so much young and super enthusiastic people that are interested in economics and in political economy and how to push forward the Israeli economy is a very exciting, very exciting for me. So I want to thank Bob and the Friedberg Institution for having this amazing initiative. We don't have a lot of initiatives like that in Israel, and I think it's super important. So before I start, I'd like to tell you two stories that I used to tell for many years. So at least 80% of people here in the audience are not aware that there was a point in time, in ancient times, very ancient times, that we didn't have the internet. Okay, so all of you assume that the internet was always there. And so in my background, like in my first at least 10 years of my career, I was sort of focused only on financial markets. This is what I was interested in. I started very early, in the age of 18, as a financial journalist in the IDF radio, actually. So so people that are not from Israel will be sort of shocked to know that in Israel we have radio in the IDF and they have a financial correspondent. So I was the financial correspondent for the IDF radio, and then I started doing it in the newspapers. And after I left the army, and for many years it was all about finance. And all my talks usually were focused on financial markets. And we're talking about the 90s. So I used to give talks usually in the late afternoon, evening, or so on. And I used to get to whatever it is. And so people would approach me just before the talk. And they always ask the same question. Can you guess what? People that were here before the internet? Sorry? Yeah, what happened in the stock market? Because way there, like in the 90s, you had to call if you had special relationship with your broker, or in Israel it's the banks. You call the banks and tell them what's happening. Nobody had like a terminal to see what's happening. So you either wait for tomorrow's newspaper, or you call the bank. So when people saw me, the first thing that they would do is just ask me what's happening in the market. And later maybe ask me what do I think about markets, and so on and so forth. So it became, so I used to start all my talks with the following story after being asked that question. So you know that Albert Einstein is standing in the gates of heaven and greeting the people that are coming. So the first guy comes in, and Einstein asks him, so what's your IQ? He says 180. Einstein is so excited. He said, this is great. I need someone to help me to continue to develop my relativity theory. So the next guy comes in, and Einstein asks him, so what's your IQ? And he says, I'm 130. So Einstein, this is great. We're going to talk about philosophy, music, culture, literature, and so on. The third guy comes in, Einstein asks him, so what's your IQ? He said, 70. So Einstein turns to him and says, what did the market do today? Okay, so this is where I fit in usually. Okay, now, So when I got here, so Bob tells me, you should come and talk with those young students. Some of them are graduates, some of them are undergraduates, and give them the lecture that you give about political economy, relationship between government and markets, and so on. So I said, okay, I'm in. And then he tells me, well, it's probably going to be not only students, but also we're bringing some other people. So I arrive here in the afternoon, and I start, walking around, and I see that there are at least like 4 or 5 PhDs in law and economics and economics. And I see that one of the most important experts in the world in pension is here. And it reminded me of a story, or other story, that this guy, that was back in the beginning of last century, then there was, I don't remember the date, there was a terrible flood somewhere in North America, in the Midwest, and there is 3 days of total flood and destroys everything. And when the rescue mission arrives at those villages that were totally flooded and devastated, they found only one guy, which is called Old Jonas. And they asked him, so Old Jonas, everybody is dead. How did you survive? He says, well, the big wooden door of the church floated on the water, and then I jumped on it, and I was able to survive. And he said, okay, but it's been almost a week. You have to eat. He says, yeah, some stuff fell off the trees, some small berries, and I ate them. And he goes into details how he survived a week in a terrible flood. Okay, so people from all over the country come time and again to this area to see the devastation of the flood, and they all meet with Old Jonas, and he tells them the story. At some point, Old Jonas, it kind of grows on him, so he quits his job, and what he does, he tells the story time and again, how he survived. It's a great thing, people are super excited, that's what he does for a living. And then Old Jonas, he gets old, and he goes to a home. And so the first day he shows up at the home, the guy that introduces him says, well, so Jonas said, what am I going to do here? Said, well, usually the guys who come here, usually, they do whatever they were doing before they came here. What did you do? He said, well, I told just this story about, the flood that we had, you remember, in the Midwest. He said, what, just tell it to the people here. So he sits around with the old guys, and he tells them the time and again and again. That's what he does for years, and then he dies. So he goes to heaven. So he arrives at the gates of heaven, and they greet him there, and he says, okay, so what's going to be here? He says, well, so what am I going to do? He said, whatever you were doing when you were still alive. He said, oh, that's okay. I have this story that I survived that flood in the Midwest. And they said, okay, just do it. But let me tell you something. You have to take into the consideration that Noach is in the audience. Okay, that was, I see that Jose understands why I was telling the story, and he's still laughing. Okay, this is the moral of the story is very simple. This is to the young people here, the people who are more than. The moral of the story is that you never want to be in front of an audience that understands in the subject matter more than you. Okay? So usually when you're with economists, tell them about politics. When they are politicians, tell them about economics, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I have to be in front of a very important economists and people from policy to talk about political economy. So I will do it. So I teach in Chicago booth a class which is called Reputation, Regulation, and Communication. And it's a relationship between business and markets and media. So as I told you before, 15 years ago, I founded The Marker, which is Israel's arguably, Bob, Israel's leading financial newspaper, and I've been involved in the last 10 years now as a journalist in promoting a lot of reforms in the Israeli economy, bringing more competition to the economy, and making sure that we have a thriving market here. Some of the times it fails, some of the times it succeeds. One of the campaigns that we led for quite a while was to introduce competition into the mobile sector, and when we eventually broke the cartel, prices went down 90%. So what I try to do in this presentation, first of all, is to start is to give a summary of a 10 weeks class that I teach in Booth about the relationship between government and markets and media. The important part is the media part of the story, because media influences politics and media influences markets and business and so on. And every now and then I will stop and I will try to talk about the Israeli case, but I will start with a lot of examples from the United States. I know some of you read The Marker, some of you seen some of the movies and the documentaries, so I don't want to repeat the usual stuff about the political economy of Israel. I want to take the discussion forward. How many of you seen the movie Magash HaKesef, The Silver Platter? Okay, thank you. So this is what I assumed. So this is, since 90% of you have seen this documentary film, so I don't want to repeat anything about the political economy of Israel that I have in this film, and I like to push it forward. Okay, so who is this? Come on, guys. So this is Adam Smith. He's quite an important guy, by the way. If you haven't heard about him, I advise you to know. I assume you all know about him. And so Adam Smith is a guy that we tend not to think about him every day. But actually, when you get out from your bed every morning into a world, a lot of things that are happening around you actually are designed and built based upon ideas that his ideas. There were people before him, people after him, but he had a lot of very, very good ideas. He knew how to write. And a lot of the things that we take for granted when we're looking at markets, governments, everything, are driven from Adam Smith's ideas. And this is his most famous quote. You know, everybody talks about Adam Smith in The Invisible Hand. Actually, if you read The Wealth of Nation, which is a 600-word pages book, you know that the invisible hand appears only twice, but it's a very powerful idea. And in a way, this is a way to say that competition works. And when we think about it, most of the stuff that we learn and teach in economics is all about the idea that competition works. And this is some of the reasons we're so enamored with competition. So this is, and you know, most of you graduated, undergraduated as undergraduates or graduates economics in the neoclassical model. We assume most of the time that we have competition in the markets. But as you know, after you graduate, then we know that in real life, very, very few markets that you meet every day. And it doesn't matter if, I'm not talking about specifically Israel, it can be Europe, it can be United States. In real life, is very different from the neoclassical model and very different from the invisible hand of Adam Smith. So this is a slide that I like to show. You know, Israelis are not huge beer drinker, but United States, a lot of people drink a lot of beer. So I have a lot of slides with all those brands, and it's all about competition and choice. But of course, the problem is, like in this case, that in the United States, we have two companies that control 60% of the market, close to 70% of the market, and they are now about to merge if the DOJ will let them, and then we're going to be in a state where we have one company called Anheuser-Busch that will have close to 70% of the market. I see some people here with eyeglasses. You can recognize the brands. Whatever you have there, you recognize all the brands. Choice, competition. Only one problem, of course. They are all owned or exclusively distributed by one company, which is called Luxottica. So if any of you is from the US, you step into a shopping mall. There are 3 retail outlets there. They are all usually owned by one company. There was huge consolidation in the eyewear company. So I can go on and on and on. Usually I have 30 slides of the most of many, many industries in the United States and other places in the world where there is huge consolidation and you have 2 or 3 players controlling a lot of the industries. And yeah, so just before, so 10 years ago, the internet became very powerful. And I remember, so I started my company as an online company, and I was super excited about how the internet is going to change everything, okay? So the internet did change a lot of things. One thing that we were very enamored with the idea that the internet is going to introduce a lot of competition where it was very difficult. There were a lot of barriers to entries before the internet, and we thought that internet has the ability to deal with a lot of barrier to entries in many, many industries. And it does. But as time passed by, we sort of started looking and we see more and more consolidation in the industry, which comes in many ways. So the best way, of course, to talk is that, I usually ask my students, what is the travel site that they use? Usually they give me 10 names of travel sites. And there are about 20 major travel sites. Nobody here probably uses a travel agent anymore. Back in the old days, we used to use travel agent. Today, we go to the travel sites. And these are the names of the travel sites that you use. The problem, of course, as you see from the top of the slide, they are all owned by 2 companies, okay? Expedia and Priceline. If you live in the US, you see the commercials of Trivago. If you travel, this is CNN, has Trivago all the time. So Trivago, there is this guy who says, don't go to all those websites, just go to Trivago. And Trivago gives you, and then he names all the websites. And super exciting, great commercial. What 99.9% of the people who view that commercial don't know that all the websites that go to Trivago are owned by the company that owns Trivago, okay? So this is Expedia, of course. So we have consolidation. There are many, many instances where, the most famous stuff is that you go into Walmart, okay, and you see a shelf with 50 different brands of pet food. One of them is private label, the other one is P&G, or other names. You're so excited. This is choice. This is competition. They are all made by the same company, okay, it's called Menu Foods. So it's huge, consolidated under different names and brands and so on. So it happens more and more and more in many industries. Let me just give you a few ideas. So all those brands. These are brands that have 60% of the market share. Nike, P&G in razors, laundry, and detergents. Nestle, Campbell, Whirlpool, and so on. And I can go on and on and on. Okay. So now let's talk about Israel. So in Israel, we had 5 players in the mobile market, 3 players in the mobile market until May 2012. You remember what the prices were? So if you are not part of we'll talk about it later, of a special interest group, like a union or a government or a big corporation, and you paid, you're a retail customer in Israel, so you would pay around $200 per month for your phone bill. And of course, if you have a family, some families would pay $500 per family. That was like 6-7 years ago. So we were pushing to bring two players into the market, more competition into the market. And of course, what did the mobile company say? No need, this is a small country, 3 players is enough. Look, even in other countries, you don't have more than 3 players. If we have more than 3 players, company will go bankrupt, ta-da-dam, ta-da-dam, ta-da-dam. This has been going on for 2 years. In the market, we had a very strong position. You have to bring in competition. The whole idea of capitalism doesn't work if you don't have competition. And so 2 players went in, boom, prices go down 90%. And all the companies are still making profit. So you open the financial accounts of Pelephone, Partner, and Cellcom, you see that the positive cash flows, normal EBITDA, 25 margin EBITDA is okay. Okay, it used to be 45, but 25% EBITDA is still okay, EBITDA margin. So, so now let's go see what's happening in the US, see how competition works. So in the US, we have only 2 or 3 players, okay? In the mobile market, sure enough, in the United States, you pay double or 3 times what you pay in Israel. Why? Markets, competition. If you don't have competition, so in the United States, we have a duopoly of AT&T and Verizon. And when you have a duopoly, you have a problem of prices and quality, of course. And so this is mobile. Let's talk about something even more important for many people is the internet connection. So this is a chart that I'd like to show because people have ideas about this country is more pro-market, this country is more capitalistic, this country is less. So the next chart that I bring to them is, this is all talk. Let's look at countries where they have competition and countries that don't have competition. And let's look at broadband. So Israelis would complain about broadband connection, how much it costs, and it's too costly. And I know if I asked you, you'd say, this is outrageous how much I pay for the internet connection. I know all about it. But look at the international comparison of countries that have competition and countries that don't have competition. And you'll be shocked. Because you will see that the United States, which is the most important and advanced, technology advanced country in the world, you see that the prices are ridiculous. Okay, let's see if I can pinpoint with that. Yeah, okay, so this is the price. Okay, just compare it to, South Korea or Japan or Hungary, okay? And this is it. And now let's look at the quality. So it's pretty mediocre. Why? If you live in the US, you know the answer, okay? So there is this monopoly or duopoly in most regions controlled by, anyone here from the United States? Controlled by Comcast? You're a subscriber to Comcast or to Verizon? Fios? Yeah, or AT&T. Okay, so you see what happens when you don't have competition. So Adam Smith was right. You look at this chart, you say, yeah, he was right. He had an intuition about that we need the competition. Okay, this is the telcos. So back 20 years ago, we had a lot of companies. Today, we have 2 or 3 that dominate. This is telecommunication. This is, you can see here, this is the United States, ranks very, very low in terms of the speed because of lack of competition. Okay, by the way, this is Israel, okay? Because we introduced competition in many ways into those markets. This is airlines in the United States, okay? So we used to have a lot of airlines in the United States. Now we have 4. So I don't have to tell you that that flying from one city to another in places where you don't have competition, the prices in the United States are sort of ridiculous, or they don't have a competition. Price of oil dropped like 50% in the last 2-3 years. Airline tickets went up in many, many routes. Okay, so this is the financial industry. If we have time, I would like to go into looking at what's happening in competition in the financial industry. This is where it really gets interesting. So I'll go over it very, very fast. This is the growth of the financial industry in the United States. This is how profitable the business is, which is super the asset management. And this is a quote that, this is a chart that I'd like to have. I'm sure that some of you that are involved in active management of asset management know this chart very well. And so basically you see here the chart that shows that between 80 to 90% of the asset management business, I just say it in Hebrew to make sure that we're on the same page, מנהלי קרנות נאמנות ומנהלי השקעות, they don't beat the market, they don't create alpha. And not only that is 80 to 90% of the people don't create any, don't beat the market, but even if we look at the 10% that do beat the market and say, okay, that's good, that's 10%, the problem is that you can never tell who is going to be the people who do those 10%, because when you look at the past performance, it's never those guys that are going to be the future results. So you come to think of it, when you look at this chart and you look at the growth of the asset management business, so you know that passive investments is growing like crazy in the last 10, 20 years, especially I think in the last quarters, I think there was a big surge in passive investment. But there is a huge industry that is not be able to bring alpha or to beat the market and still is able to charge significant fees. As you know, people who are sophisticated, you know, if you have two customers of pension funds in the United States, and I looked into it a lot in the last few years, so people who are sophisticated sometimes would pay 10% or 20%, or people who are not sophisticated. And so this is Israel, by the way. We're talking about the situation in Israel in terms of competition. This is before we started the last reforms. So this is the level of concentration in Israel. This is not an industry concentration, because in Israel, unlike the United States, on top of industry concentration, we used to have another kind of concentration where you have groups that had large share of the economy, and they had like sort of tacit collusion. I don't compete with you in my industries, you don't go in my industry. So this is Israel, what we call in Hebrew rikuziyut, and we know that we sort of started dealing with it in the last 5 years. This is the banking sector in Israel. You know, we have two banks, 70% that control between 60 to 70% of the banking sector. In the U.S., people are appalled by the level of concentration in the banking system in the United States is the highest today than in the last century. People are appalled. There is 5 banks that have like 50% of the market share. In Israel, we have 2 that have 60%. Gives you an idea about concentration in the banks. Here it is, concentration in the banking sector. And of course, we know in Israel there is this crazy thing is that the more safe you are as a borrower, okay, the higher the banks charge you. There is an inverse relationship between your risk and what they charge you, okay, because of the lack of competition in the Israeli market. If you are a tycoon, that you don't get, you pay the lowest rates. The default rate was very high, and if you are a small retail client, usually very provision of bad debts was very small, and of course the rates were crazy for a while. We're now trying to fix it with another reform in the banking sector. Okay, this is the pension world, of course. So what is the problem with the financial industry? Why is it that it's very difficult to get the market to work? So there are many studies about it. We know the problem is that most of the people have very limited knowledge of finance. We call it asymmetric information. And so most of the people have very limited knowledge of finance. And there are many research that say not only people have very limited knowledge of finance, they also are they don't want to go into it, okay? There are very interesting research done by You go to people who are not interested, who have no knowledge of finance, and you try to help them, give them advice, and so on. They still won't, you try to give them disclosure. So they done tests. They started having a lot of disclosure on your pension funds. Turns out that many people, when they get their monthly report from the pension fund, they don't want to open the envelope. Okay? They don't like to be exposed to financial information. So we have a big problem of asymmetric information here. And this is I picked it up from a review done by the RAND Corporation recently of all the literature done in the last 10 years about asymmetric information in the industry. This is taken from like 100 or so empirical research done mostly in the United States. Okay, so the problem with the idea, we are very much enamored with competition and markets, and the problem is that we have many, many market failures. So we know all about them. First, we have monopolies and oligopolies and cartels, and then we know we find them in the marketplace much, much more than we want to see them. They are everywhere, especially in Israel. In Israel, many industries have 2 or 3 players. Very easy to have a tacit collusion. So this is the first trivial market failure. We have asymmetric information. We have negative externalities like pollutions. And of course, we have the public goods, those goods that the market cannot produce. And public goods, you learned in your first year in economics, are goods that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Example for public goods: fresh air, street lights, national defense, and so on. Okay, so we have market failures. After the Great Depression in the United States, 100 years ago, economists started to look at what's happening in the markets. And there, we had a lot of unemployment. We had 4 years of significant negative growth. And economists started thinking about it. And then more and more economists and other people started looking at the idea of what is called in economics literature public interest. And what is the public interest? Public interest says we love markets. Markets are great. This is the way that society progresses. But we know that we have market failures. So very easy. What we have to bring to the policy is very simple. We bring in politicians and regulators, and they're going to fix those market failures. So we assume that public officials want to assume their position with the desire to promote the common good, and well-meaning public officials choose policy they think will promote the public interest. So this is the idea of public interest. We bring in regulation, we solve market failures, and again, we have a competitive economy. But in the 50s and in the 60s, important economists and political scientists started rethinking the idea of public interest. They said, yes, you know what? Markets are great. We have market failures. We bring in regulation to solve those market failures or to provide public goods. But there is one problem with the theory. We have a suspicion that politicians and regulators are not saints. Okay, do you agree, by the way? Are you willing to entertain the possibility that politicians and regulators are not saints? And this is, of course, the public choice school of thought. It says, okay, it's a great idea to think about the fact that, we can fix those market problems. The problem is that those regulators, that we forgot to look at not what we want politicians and regulators to do, but how the world really works. Okay, but we say, yay, just a second. Let's say that we have this understanding now that politicians and regulators not necessarily are focused on increasing our welfare. But we are in a democracy, okay? Regulators are being appointed by politicians, and in a democracy, we can replace politicians that we don't like. So this is a point in time where I'll show you a very nice clip that I like to show. This is Jimmy Kimmel. And Jimmy Kimmel wants to introduce the idea of, in a democracy, why do we live in democracy? Okay, because we assume that we have people out there that are informed about what's happening in the world. And they go out and they vote every 4 years. And if they think that the regulators and politicians are doing a lousy job, they change the politicians. This is what democracy is all about, having enlightened and informed voters. So this is the reason I like to show this clip from 2 years ago in the middle of the debate in the United States about Obamacare, about the Affordable Care Act. Take a look at this. This is very funny and very short.
These government shutdowns have happened before. The last one was in 1996. But the debate on this one is particularly heated because people have such strong opinions about Obamacare. Interestingly, the polls show that most Americans say they don't like Obamacare, but they love what's in it when it all gets broken down. It's like the opposite of a McNugget. So, it's interesting. And when there are complicated issues to study, most people just side with whoever they usually side with. So I decided to conduct an experiment today. We sent a camera crew out on the Hollywood Boulevard to ask people which they thought was better, the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. Now, as you may know, Obamacare is just a nickname for the Affordable Care Act. They're the same thing. But lo and behold, we found people who did not know that, and that didn't stop them from weighing in on it.
We're talking about health care today, and which plan do you support, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act.
And what is it about Obamacare that you do not like?
I just think that there's a lot of holes in it, and it needs to be revamped. I think it's
And you think the
hasn't been
Affordable
thought out.
You think the Affordable Care Act is a better plan than Obamacare?
Better, but I'm not happy with that either.
What do you agree with, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
I'm more sort of towards the Affordable Care Act, but I'm also very sympathetic for people that don't have the ability to have proper medical insurance.
So the Affordable Health Care Act is still a better option than
Yes.
Obamacare?
Yes.
And why do you not agree with the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think it's not really available for all.
So the Affordable Care Act is more affordable than Obamacare?
Just the name says it all.
Right.
Absolutely. I think it's nice that everyone can afford it, and everyone should be able to afford it, but to force people to pay something and then doctors to make something, limiting their ability to do their job, that's kind of anti-American.
Right. So Obamacare is un-American?
I think it's kind of un-American to force people. What if they can't afford it? What if they want more
And
coverage?
the Affordable Care Act is American?
I think it's more American because it allows people to make their own choices on what they want and who they want to work with.
Do you agree with the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare?
The affordable.
And why do you prefer the Affordable Care Act over Obamacare?
I just don't agree with the whole Obamacare policy thing that's going on. I just don't agree with it.
And do you believe that an informed citizenry is essential to a democracy?
Yes,
So you disagree with Obamacare?
Yes, I do.
Do you think insurance companies should be able to exclude people with pre-existing conditions?
No.
Do you agree that young people should be able to stay on their parents' plans until they are 26?
They should be able to, yes.
Do you agree that companies with 50 or more employees should provide health care?
I do.
And so by that logic, you would be for the Affordable Care Act?
Yes.
What plan do you support, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act.
And why do you support that over
I
Obamacare?
do not like Obamacare. I don't like anything that has to be forced for everybody to buy. This is not good.
Do you think Obamacare is socialist?
Yes, I do.
Do you think the Affordable Care Act is socialist?
No.
Do you believe that Obamacare will eventually lead to gun prohibition?
Yes.
Do you know that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing?
No, they're not. Thanks, you made me look stupid.
That's what we do.
Okay, you did good.
So my students usually like that clip, but the problem is that just before or after that clip, I start asking them questions about regulation in other industries in the United States. And of course, they are not only very comfortable with their level of knowledge, and sort of there is this tension in the room, after seeing this clip, and then I start asking them about the Dodd-Frank Act or any piece of important legislation in the United States. And of course, they know nothing, even though they are smart MBAs who go to an Ivy League institution. And then I said, you know what, cool down. It's okay. You're not stupid, but you are rationally ignorant. And what is rationally ignorant? So a very quick story that I like to show people. I'll show an American example, and then we'll go to an Israeli example, is of course the sugar industry in the United States. So I don't know if you know that, but in the United States, American people pay twice as much as any other people in other OECD countries, and actually not only in OECD countries, for the sugar. And the reason people in the United States, so this is the prices of sugar. And by the way, talk about sugar, if you go into an American grocery, you see a lot of brands. Turns out that different brands owned by the same one company or two companies. So first of all, prices are very high, but actually the prices, this is something that you can import. Just concentration in the market won't help you to get there. And of course, we'll see soon the reason. But let's look at the numbers to see why people are rationally ignorant. Okay, so the United States regulation designed the market in sugar, where the people who grow and sell sugar get a subsidy of $3.5 billion a year. This is injection. This goes into the top line of the people of three companies in the United States. Okay, three very large corporations. Okay, so each one of them makes like $350 million more on the top line. Since it's in the top line, it goes down to the bottom line. Very, very profitable business. They make a lot of money. Okay, who's paying for it? Of course, the subsidies come in many forms. First of all, there are crazy tariffs on sugar to the United States. And then they get a lot of subsidies and loans and so on. But look at what happened. So the American consumers paid. So look what I did. I did a very simple back of the envelope calculation. I took those $3.5 billion and I divided it by the number of American consumers. This is $11 a year. Then I divided it not onto American consumers, but American voters. This is $28 a year. Okay, now the picture starts to be more clear. So those guys are making, each one of them, $350 million per year from those subsidies, from this regulation. The American consumer and voters, what he pays is $10 a year if we're looking at the overall consumers, or just $28 if we're looking at the voter. This is where basically the irrational ignorance starts. So does any American voter or citizen ever went to learn what is the design and regulation and tariffs in the US industry? Of course no. Only very, very few people who are super interested in that or might have read somewhere an article about that, nor usually how does it work. So this is the consumer. Okay, in order to understand what's happening to sugar in the sugar regulation, how competition is being prevented, he has to go into a very, very lengthy and costly education and learning and research. And what he's going to make out of it? $11 per year. Okay? Now, this is not the worst of it. Why? Because let's say that he also devoted all the time and energy to understand sugar. And sugar, by the way, is very simple. Think about the Affordable Care Act. You know, this is like 20,000 pages of bureaucracy and rules and clauses. So this is a simple regulation, very costly to understand, and you save $11 if you are able to influence the regulation and the politics of sugar. So this is the American voter. Okay, this is how it's done if you're interested in that. Price support, tariff rate quotas, sugar re-export program, feedstock flexibility. By the way, you would think, yay, but where are the people that are heavy users of sugar? Wouldn't they be in opposition? Okay, those guys? Well, there is a special clause that they don't have to buy with the tariffs. Okay, so special interests know how to work out that other special interests won't go against them. All right. So this is the sweet spot. Okay. So how do the sugar industry gets away with it? Okay. So if you do some basic research, not very difficult, you'll find out there is one company that dominates the sugar industry, and it's owned by two brothers, Pepe and Pepe Fanjul, and I forgot the name of his brother, I think George, doesn't matter. Let's say Pepe and George Fanjul. They are Cuban brothers that escaped from Cuba 57 years ago, and they really know how to enjoy capitalism in the United States. They have a billions dollar company that dominates the sugar industry in the United States. Okay, but how do they make sure that they get the right regulation and protection from competition? So this is the point that I like in the lecture, because when I'm not teaching in a university, but with an audience like you, so half of you are on the right and half of you on the left. So people said, well, they buy politicians. So I said, well, you know what, here is Pepe Fanjul with the Bush family. Actually, he's not only a big contributor, but he's also a bundler. You know what is a bundler? He does not only gives money to the Bush. By the way, he gives money to the Republican Party for 30 years. He's also makes sure the other people give money. He's a bundler, okay? So this is Pepe, but Pepe has a brother, George. Boom. Okay? So this is one of my most important messages in most of, you've seen it in Israel, but this is all over the world. You know, big money, special interest groups don't care if it's right or left. They want to get protection from markets. They want to get protection from competition. If you have to do it with the Bushes, you do it with the Bushes. If you have to do it with in the United States, it's very easy, because in the last 30 years you have only the Clintons and the Bushes. So you know you develop a relationship. You know, it's called repeat play. In game theory, we call it repeat playing. It's easy to get good relationships. So they are big on campaign contribution. They are big on bundling. You know, in last July, there was a funny story in the Miami Herald. Nobody, of course, noticed. Nobody talked about it. Nobody picked it up. You didn't read it in the Wall Street Journal, nor the New York Times, or whatever. That Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are going to have huge fundraiser in Miami, Florida. What do you know? The Pepe brothers, the Fanjul brothers, are sponsoring both benefits to raise money. So Pepe is taking the Democrats, and George is taking the GOP, the Republicans. So this is how they get away with protecting their business from competition. Okay, this is the real life, actual how it works. Economists, of course, don't look at the specific story of the Fanjul brothers. Economists have been looking into the way that special interest groups operate, and they come with very, very clever ideas of the way that a special interest group. Turns out that, unlike our intuition, that the more people we have in the group, the more effective it is. Actually, the smaller the group, the more effective it is. And we've seen in the example why. Because when you have a group of 3 people that want to influence government, like the sugar growers, each one of them benefits tremendously, and they have a huge incentive and ability to lobby the government. 300 million Americans who foot the bill for sugar cannot organize, okay? So this is the collective action problem of source and the free rider problem. And so the benefits of fighting the influence of special interest groups, this activity is a public good. Nobody has his own economic incentives to do it, and we have the free rider problem. What is the free rider problem? The free rider is very easy. Let's assume that I give you now an Israeli example of a special interest groups that gets $3.5 billion in rents, monopolistic rents from the public. Can anybody think about, I'm giving this example, one special interest group in Israel, it's the same number like the sugar, that's why I like it, that economists assume that their monopolistic rents are around $3 billion. No, this is much smaller. It is a very smart special interest group, very effective one. The guys, the unions that control the airports. The army is bigger than that, that's true, okay. Tnuva, no, Tnuva is not that size. Sorry? Tnuva and milk is the same. Delek, no. Banks, thank you very much, sir. So if you look at even Bank of Israel, which is, we'll talk about later about regulator, even Bank of Israel that has a very cozy relationship with banks in Israel, as you know. Even Bank of Israel now admits that we don't have competition and we're paying silly prices for a very small group of unionized workers in the bank and so on and so on. So let's say that you are the dispersed public. I want to organize you guys to get rid of those 10 billion shekels every year. The problem is, of course, that once it's dispersed over 9 million people, every one of you looks at a very tiny slice of that. And you are not going to, and let's say that, because I convinced you here and you sort of said, well, he looks like a nice guy, let's work with him on lobbying to introduce competition to the banking sector. So the first thing he says, well, divided among all the Israelis, it's not a lot of money, but let's think about it. But the next thing you'd say, you know what? Let Guy do it. And if he wins, we are going to enjoy it anyway. This is the free rider problem. So the collective action problem and the free rider problems basically creates a political economy where only the special interest groups can influence regulation. Now comes the tricky and dicey part of the lecture that I like. So in the Fanjul case, it's very easy. I show you two pictures, you know how it works. Okay, they are blatant enough to do it in the daylight, okay? They just, everybody knows that they are paying the GOP and the Democrats. They're doing it for years. Everybody's cool with it. This is sugar. Okay, but in most cases, this is not how in most cases, you cannot get away with this kind of legal corruption. So let's look at the way that special interest groups influence. How do they get the regulation that they first of all, if you're interested in reading this, so one of the first guys that invented this idea is of course Gordon Tullock, and he was an expert on bureaucracy. He explained why is it that bureaucrats and government officials usually are captured by those special interests and are not only concerned with the welfare of the dispersed public. He invented the word. Invented the idea of rent sinking. Another economist named Ann Kruger was smart enough to call it a rent sinking. She became very famous for that, but he came with the original idea of rent seeking. So rent seeking basically is, instead of creating value, you are a businessman or a special interest group in the private market or in the public market, instead of just doing better product, cheaper price, you say, well, no, better, and this is not how to make money. The better way is to protect myself from competition, to get corporate welfare, and so on. So how do you capture the regulator? How do you make sure that the regulators do what you want and not what is best for the dispersed public? So in the developing economies, it's a simple way. You bribe the regulator, okay? So this is, captured by threats and bribes. If you tell the regulator or the politician, you give me protection from competition, I'll pay you money. If you don't give me protection from competition, I'll make sure that bad stuff happens to you, okay? So this is that. Then in the United States and in Israel, many places, you make sure that the regulators know that they're going to work for industry. This is what's called a revolving door. the back and forth. In Israel, what are the examples in Israel? More names? More ideas? Don't be so shy. Yeah. So we know all the people in Israel that were charged with bringing competition to the banking sector never made it, but they did work to go for the banks. So this is a good example. And all the people who were charged with bringing competition to other industries, instead of bringing competition, some of them went to work for industry. Okay, then we have capture by information complexity. This is probably the most difficult one to solve. The problem is, take for instance now an amazing company. Who is the biggest monopoly in the world today? Or one of the biggest monopolies in the world today? I'll give you a hint. All of you use it, and not only that, I assume that 90% of it used it today. Not Facebook, but what? Google. Yeah, so everybody uses Google. I like to say Google is a monopoly, and then they say, no, there is other players. Say, yeah, you use Bing all the time, right? You Binged it before you, yeah. Okay, who uses here Bing? Who knows what is Bing? Okay, so they have a competitor, Bing. Okay, everybody Googles, okay? Somebody here doesn't use Google, he uses another search engine? Okay, so this is a sort of a monopoly. Now let's think, so Google is a very interesting monopoly because the problem with Google is not that it has such a large market share. The problem is the amount of information that it has and collects on people. And people don't know really, this is a very interesting thing. When a player like Google has a lot of information, one of the things that there is now growing literature by economists in many universities in the United States looking to the idea what happens when Google collects a lot of information about consumers. So one way to exploit this kind of information is to make sure that you learn about your buying habits and to make sure that you can discriminate against you and offer you higher prices once you start to understand how does your demand curve looks like. Anyway, think about Google, for instance. Let's say that the government says, well, I want to deal with the problem of privacy, and so on and so on. Who was the person that visited the White House in the last few years after Barack Obama and Michelle Obama? Chief lobbyist of Google. So they have to disclose who was visiting the White House. So they went out and says, who is the third guy after Obama and Michelle? The woman who handles lobbying for Google. So Google is a big player on the Hill today. And Obama is going to be out of office in January. And people have been looking, so where are the Obama people going to go? Most of them are going to work for Google, Facebook, Uber, and you name it, okay? Because all those companies now want protection from government, all sorts of protection from government. So now think about it. Let's say we say, okay, we want to deal with that. Want to look at what's happening where they're in Google. Are they involved in anything that prohibits competition? Think about it in terms of complexity of information, complexity and information. Who are going to know? Who is really in the know of the search business? Okay? The people, the bureaucrats in Washington or the Google people? Okay? So actually, the regulators are way behind the people in Google. So this is captured by information and complexity. We have captured by reputation. We have captured by identification. We have a lot of kind of captures. I want to start ending this discussion. Okay, how it works in Israel. Okay, so I didn't translate it into Hebrew. I'm sorry. But I'll ask one of the Israeli to be kind enough, since we have 2 or 3 or 4 people here that don't read Hebrew, to read it aloud and translate it into English. That works? Please. One volunteer, please.
Shelley Yefimowicz, she was the chairman of Avoda Party, Labour Party.
Yeah.
So she says, Gabrieli told me, Gabrieli is sort of a mobster, something.
No, he's not. Oh, no, he's not. That's a common mistake. Who is Gabrieli?
Businessman?
Yeah. No, he's not a lobbyist. Who is Gabrieli? Rational ignorance. Who is Gabrieli? Thank you very much, sir. What's your name? So Elchanan says, Gabrieli is the CEO of the largest holding company in Israel. At one point in time, this group controlled 25% of all financial assets in Israel. One company. The people who control this company, one is now serving second jail time, and the next one will know in a few weeks whether he's going to be in jail time also. Okay? So this is the CEO of that company that before a few years back controlled 25% of all financial assets in Israel, although he was personally bankrupt. Okay? This was... So look at... So Yechimovich, a politician, telling us, the CEO of that company told me, if you quit lashing out and attacking our chairman, the controlling shareholder, we will kill the story. What does it mean? Can anybody explain to me what does it mean we will kill the story? This is a politician talking about the CEO of the largest investment company, and she's talking about the story. Can anyone understand what she's talking about? What? Spike. Right. So George Gilder is an American. He never heard those names, but he picked up the idea very fast. Okay? So basically so she's saying that she was blackmailed. She was threatened, blackmailed. They told her, they controlled, they bought with your money the second largest newspaper in Israel. And they told her, if you don't quit talking about our monopolies, we will have investigative journalists going after you and trash you just before the primaries. Now, why do I show this slide? Not because this is outrageous. No, this is not the real reason I'm showing you. The real reason is that all of you, except only for 1 and 2, saw this story only now for the first time. Because the media wouldn't talk about it in those days. Because of fear of retaliation from those groups. So this is a great mechanism. Have everyone seen the movie The Godfather? Okay? You remember the scene with the dead horse? Okay, so this is taking the dead horse into political economy. Okay? You mess around with us. You talk about our monopolies. You talk about how we rip off investors, consumers. We will buy a newspaper and destroy your reputation ahead of the primaries. And nobody wanted to mess around with that. And by the way, nobody would deny that story. Because when I saw it for the first time, I said, well, now everybody's going to come out who is involved in this story, says she's lying. Nobody said that. And of course, there is now more and more and more corroborating. A lot of people are now telling the same story. This is not her. This is not a unique example. So this is regulatory capture. What? So fortunately, in this case, we heard the chairman of Bank Hapoalim, largest bank in Israel, is now serving a second jail time. Okay? I always say, I don't like to say jail time because I'm a financial journalist. I always say that we make sure that he gets a government hotel, subsidized government hotel. So he's getting now the second term in a government hotel. So this is how it works in the United States. Revolving door, capture of politicians, and so on. This is another favorable politician. You know her. Ask why is she going to work for the people who she made sure that they get protection from competition. She was the Ministry of Communication making sure that there is no markets in telecom. And you can see she's very funny. And this was a long talk. So I have a lot of slides, but we don't have the time. But I do want you to remember only one thing from this talk. Okay? Write it down on your napkins or just remember it. 4 letters. This is it. This is the whole thing. This is so simple and so powerful. Why is it that most of the time markets are distorted and we don't get the benefit of markets? Concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. When you have a situation where using regulation and politicians, people can get concentrated benefit, sugar monopoly, and it is taking from many people, dispersed people, diffuse cost. This is how markets are being rigged. Okay, before I go into that, because Bob signals me that it's time to there, let's open the floor for discussion. Yes.
So, what do we do?
Okay. So, I don't want to sound like a cliche at this point. But first of all, what you're doing here is super important. Why? Because as we see in this model that we described, the model is based on what we call rational ignorance, okay? Based on the fact that many people, how many do you think percentage of Israelis voters or people that are engaged in politics and in policy in Israel are aware of those issues, If you hear the discussion, the discourse in Israeli politics and economics, what do you hear? You hear very rarely those ideas, okay? So the most important thing, and this is what I've been doing for many years as a political entrepreneur and as a journalist, as a businessman, all those things, I've been trying to promote those ideas and get people to understand them. And as you know, more and more people, and we've seen very positive changes in Israel in the last 5 years. We have a huge challenges ahead of us, but still, in some industries, we see for the first time that they want to bring competition. They want to make the markets work better. We see it all the time. As I know, the funny thing about it is the following. And this is something that I get all the time, okay? And I probably would get that from you if we sit and talk. People say, well, this is horrible. Situation in Israel is horrible in that respect, ta-da-dam, ta-da-dam. And said, you know what? It's not really that horrible. And the reason is that 5 years ago, you're totally unaware of it. You were in a different, on a different star, on a different planet. Now people are starting to understand how the political economy works, how markets work, how government works, and so on. And now you are frustrated. But this is part of the process, getting you and I and everybody engaged in those ideas, getting the political discourse in those ideas, getting the intellectual discourse in this direction. And of course, it's tough. Why? Because people would rather engage in what we call wedge issues, okay? They're like, no, let's not talk, So politicians, special interest groups, and many people would not like you to engage in those issues, and we understand why. They want you to be somewhere else. And so they bring in wedge issues, okay? They says, religion, not religion. There are many ways to get the conversation away for this. And I think that all of us here have to push this discussion into be more enlightened discussion.
You supported in your newspapers.
Oh, I like that.
You supported Syriza, and you supported Bernie Sanders, and you supported many extremers that you think that they are less corrupt than other politicians. But those extremers advance ideas which were proved wrong by economists. They advance many extreme ideologies and just wrong policies. So don't you think that ideas also matter and not just interest groups? I mean, some of the people who made many people poor were not corrupt. They just had wrong ideas.
Yeah. So first of all, Uri, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing in the past 25 years if I didn't believe that ideas are sometimes the most important thing. I think that, I started this presentation with Adam Smith because I said he had ideas that changed the world. So I am a big believer in ideas, and as you know, in social capital, in norms and culture, okay? And this is a strand of literature in economics that is growing all the time, the importance of ideas and norms. Now, as to my newspaper, first of all, so in our newspaper, I know a lot of people look at the newspaper, especially when it comes to the issue of the Palestinian, the Palestinians and the Israelis, and I think, you know, they have this line, this agenda. But unlike what you think, I know your opinion is, that we have many, many people in writing in our journalists. We have hundreds of journalists, okay? And each of them has his own opinion. I think that, you know, you talked about Syriza. I think that Syriza is destroying Greece, and nobody is supporting their ideas. The only thing that I recall that we wrote about it is this is what happens when, so I compared the Greek economy to the Israeli economy in terms of what happens when you have huge bloated government sector and you don't have markets that are opening, then you get radical and crazy ideas. This is a kind of a warning signs. I try not, you know, to mix the issues that are very divisive in the economy of the situation with the Arab world and the Palestinians with the economics issues. Many of my colleagues don't agree with that line. There used to be a point in time for many, many years that you say, you know, we don't want to hear anything about economics, about politics, about political economy. We have to bring peace. Okay, if we don't bring peace, nothing will change. I'm not a subscriber of this idea. I think, yeah, well, I'm not sure that peace is going to be here tomorrow or in a decade or 2 decades. And I think that you don't need to bring peace before you introduce competition into markets.
I want to ask if you think this could be the equilibrium of the system. So now I know and I'm informed, and I'm not going to vote accordingly because I don't care about sugar that much. So given that that's how we all are, what's going to change? So long as there are government officials, somebody's going to be around to gain some interest out of it, are we stuck in a circle for it?
Yeah, so it's a great question, actually. It's, you know, so some people think that, and we are in sort of way, we are trained many times to think about democracy as voting once in every 4 years. And actually, if you think about it, and we don't have enough time to think about it, if you really want to have functioning democracy, and you want to change policy, you want to change norms, you want to change ideas, voting is a very small part of the story, okay? Because in democracy happens every day, okay? So you can have great ideas about government, about policies, but if you go to some kind of government agency and you get horrible treatment, horrible service, and you see corruption, and you see a lot of wrongdoings going on, this is really what frames your relationship with democratic institution. This is much more important. So democratic process is a lot of things. It's intellectuals, academics that are raising their voices and talking about issues and creating ideas and norms. It's more engaged civilians. It's in the community. This is a lot of things. You cannot say only, okay, you know, every now and then I think about those issues and then 1 in 4 years. No, you have to be involved all the time. And each one of us, and I can tell you also when I speak with people in small groups, I ask them, what is it that you do? What is your profession? What is it that you're interested in? What is your position? And says, this is how you can influence in your own communities, in your own companies, in your own industries, on your own peers. This is the way really that functioning democracy works.
George.
The leading American venture capitalist, Peter Thiel, might even debate much of what you said tonight.
Definitely.
And he believes that all capitalism is the pursuit of fugitive positions of monopoly. And many of your charts up there were, you know, there were static charts of current, who cares, the beer market. I mean, what's really happening in the United States in the beer market, for example, is the proliferation of hundreds of local little breweries, all sorts of new competitions with new drinks and new beverages, and that beer market, probably Pabst and their products can hardly be different. I don't, it's the static versus dynamic vision. And what's most crucial, monopolies are good. They mean an innovation. Every time you have an innovation, you have a monopoly. And the crucial question is whether Israel really remains a startup nation. So these various monopolies are constantly being confronted by new companies and new products and new ideas. Creative destruction, as we've been hearing.
Okay, so you raised three issues, so I'll have to, so let's start, I'll end with what you asked about Israel. So Israel, startup nation, okay? So let's start with that. And then we'll talk about Peter Thiel. So let's start with Israeli startup nation. So people say, well, Israel is a startup nation. This is the high-tech sector. But as Israelis, you know the truth, okay? This is a dual economy. So companies that have to compete, startups and high-tech companies that have to compete in world markets are super competitive. If they are not super competitive, they won't survive. So let's not mix the startups with the banks or the ports or with the markets that are concentrated and protected in many respects. Those are totally different. And by the way, as you know, only 7% or 8% of the labor force is in high-tech related industries. You know, we cannot say, and this is not growing for quite a while. Okay, so in the past 10 years, it hovers between 7 to 9%. If we don't deal with the rest of the labor market, with the rest of the economy, 90% of the economy, we won't be able to increase productivity, and productivity is what creates wealth and growth. So this is now you said what's really happening in Israel in the ability of new companies. So in the startup, where there is no protection for government, and we have to compete abroad, you see new companies coming all the time. In the rest of the economy, it doesn't happen. Now, I advise you to go and look at what's happening to creation of new business in the United States. There is a lot of research now going out. Turns out that in the last 30 years, parallelly to this consolidation, there are less and less business formation, new business formation in the United States. We saw the charts, okay? So the flip side of that coin, the problem with having concentration in markets is that we have less and less innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, as for Peter Thiel, I agree with Peter Thiel. All capitalists and all businesses want to do one thing. They're in pursuit of one thing, to be a monopoly. And we know why, because monopoly is the only way to make money in the long term. If you don't get a monopoly, it's the only way to get excess returns for the. So all businesses, or most businesses, are in the pursuit of being monopolists. All capitalists are being a monopolist. And it is for us to make sure that everybody wants to be a monopolist, and we enjoy this incentive that everybody wants to grow. But we want to make sure that once you get that market power, you are not able to shut out other competitors. So this is the dichotomy in capitalism, or as one of my colleagues like to say, that capitalism is great. The problem is with the capitalists, that they don't want competition. So when you're an entrepreneur, you're starting out, you want to be the big guys, you want to grow, you want competition, you want markets, you want access to markets, you believe in everything. Once you are the big player, you want to make sure that you have an easy life and there is no competition. This is capitalism. Yes?
Okay, so let's say I agree with you that...
Don't agree with me so fast.
This competition thing is the most important thing, and you sent us an article that says that it's the special interests are the downfall of democracies and stuff like that. So it seems like there is a pretty obvious solution. You take the antitrust authority and you make it like the Supreme Court, like no infinite terms and lots of money, and you can't work anywhere afterwards, and give it ultimate power. And that's it, because if you can, for each example you gave, it's pretty easy. Either it's very easy to show that it's not competitive, and then the antitrust can solve it, or you can't show it and you can't convince us either. So where's it's like an inconsistency in the argument.
Okay.
Seems to me.
Okay, so first of all, just about the inconsistency of the argument, you assume that, you know, the people who have to deal with the competition and the antitrust are saints. This is okay. You know, or you assume that the people in the Supreme Court are saints. Okay, so, well, I beg to differ. I don't think that we have saints in the, I don't think that we have saints anywhere in the society. And by the way, even if you have, you know, the number one economist in the world, where is Givoni that I spoke with. So he had his PhD thesis with the number one cited economist in the world, Andrei Schleifer. He's the most cited economist in the world today. He's an economist from Harvard, very, very smart guy. His last famous book is about the, and he's he's the firmest, biggest believers in free markets. And his last book is about the decline of judges and the ascent of regulation, and he explains it in economist terms. Why is it that courts fail many, many times in dealing with regulation and dealing with competition and other issues? But we can go on into this. Why is it? Because in courts, usually the level of sophistication and knowledge and asymmetric information and so on in many industries is a bit of a problem. And then, of course, then the courts bring in experts. And then we go back to the question of, you know, the experts, who are they working for many, many times? But let's discuss for a second the idea that you introduced of antitrust, which is a super important idea. So let's go to the history. And remember, where was antitrust invented and why? So people tend to forget that antitrust is the invention of the Americans. Okay, antitrust was invented in 1890 by an American politician called Sherman, who introduced the Sherman Act. And you know, Sherman Act has not changed since 1890, and it talks about the importance of having competition and antitrust in America. And then it was amended by the Clayton Act in the 20th last century. And actually, we are in Israel, okay? And it's a good point in time to say that this year we are celebrating 100 years of the nomination to the American Supreme Court, Justice Louis Dambis Brandeis, that is regarded arguably as one of the 5 most important law scholars in the history of the United States. And I really advise you to go back and to read all the books and literature written by Louis Brandeis exactly 112 years ago, 102 years ago, about antitrust and about the importance of competition. And Dambis, going back to your question about Supreme Courts and regulators and how is it, you know, to bring in, so Brandeis, he emphasized a lot when he reminded the American people all the time, first of all, how important he was a big believer, firm believer in markets, okay? And he reminded the American people all the time. He was an advisor to Woodrow Wilson, and later Teddy Roosevelt picked up many of his ideas. And he reminded the American people time and again that the problem with monopolies and concentration and all those things that we discussed is not only economic problem, but the idea of entrenchment. What does it mean? It means once you have monopoly power, once markets are concentrated, once you have very few players in the market, you get political power. And then you entrench. Now, there are many ways to entrench political power. In many ways, and I don't have time to go into it, one of the ways to make it is to make sure that even if those issues, ideas, get to the Supreme Court or get to the antitrust authority, competition will not be brought in. And when we look at the history of antitrust in the United States, we see waves, okay? We see periods in time where there was a fierce regulatory action in the United States and you had more and more competition. Now, there are some studies on it, and in every study in economics you can bring an opposing studies, but some studies show that when you have vigorous antitrust policy, this is when you have increased productivity, increased growth, and so on. So if you want to go and read, it's, this is not protected anymore by copyright because he wrote this book 100 years ago. Very nice book that you can download on the online. It's called Other People's Money and the Way the Bankers Use It by Louis Dembitz Brandeis. I really encourage you to go and look at the role of, yes, please.
You mentioned the importance of the internet and how it was not as strong as it was 10 years ago. And what about the role of the social media? What about if there is a chance that social media can contribute?
Okay, this is a great, this is a very important question for a host of reason. I'll try to summarize it. First of all, I like people saying social media. Why? So, how many of you use social media here? Thank you. How many of you use Facebook? Thank you. How many of you use another social network, not LinkedIn for business, that is not Facebook? What is it that you use? Yeah, no, I mean social network, not the 144, the social network other than Facebook. Yes? What? No, crowd surfing. Couch surfing. Okay. So what is the market share in this room of Facebook? Yeah, 99%. Okay. So this is the first thing that we have to think about Facebook. Now, if you follow the news in the US ahead of the presidential election, there is a very interesting story. So all of you go to your Facebook every day. Some of you use it 3 hours a day. This is the data. Of course, you are much more enlightened, sophisticated people, I know. But some other people that you know, this was a joke. Some other people that you know use 2 or 3 hours a day Facebook. Okay. And you know that in Facebook you have the news feed. Anyone can tell me here how the news feed works? Algorithm, it's a good, nice way to start the conversation. Okay. How does the news feed algorithm works? Give you things you like. Okay. Everybody agrees that it gives you things that you like? Sapir?
It's all of this. It's also about the time published and how many people that is part of your network has liked it or shared it.
And do you know it's Sapir's effect? Or you just guess?
No, I read about it.
Where did you read about it?
I don't know, some article.
So go to Facebook, terms and usage, terms and references, or whatever, and go back to me and tell me if it's what Sapir said is written there. We don't know how this algorithm works. Facebook doesn't share it with people. She says, this is sophisticated stuff. We want to make sure that you're happy. You like it. So 6 months ago, a group of sort of employees that quit Facebook came out. George knows this story. Came out and says, you know what? This is not an author algorithm. There are editors. We work as editors for Facebook. And turns out that we sort of suppressed Republican ideas because we are liberals. So Mark Zuckerberg went out and said, this is BS. We don't do that. This is a computer out there from the sky, from the cloud. He does it. No human ever touches this. People were insisting. A month after that, Mark Zuckerberg went out, and what did he say? Yes, of course, there are human editors that decide what goes into the algorithm. And then he had to go and to appease all the conservative opinion leaders. So Mark Zuckerberg sat down with all the conservative opinion leaders in the United States to tell them, yeah, we've been bad, we won't do it again, I promise you, ta-da-dam, for now on it's not gonna happen, and so on. Well, maybe now this is totally neutral. I don't know how you design something that is totally neutral in such a complicated world like Facebook. One thing is for sure, Facebook decides how it's going to present it. And going back to your question, 2 billion people, 2 billion people log into Facebook each week. And half of the Americans tell us today that Facebook is the way they get their news. Now, does Facebook employ journalists? Of course no. So okay, it just links to other newspapers. Yes, but Facebook is the gatekeeper. Facebook can destroy the New York Times tomorrow if it decides, you know what, we won't link to the New York Times. New York Times can lose half of its traffic just by tweaking the algorithm of Facebook. So this is the first thing about social networks. Social networks, AKA Facebook. Okay? When you have such a monopolized platforms, Facebook, Google, Apple, and those guys, there is a question of how does media works. The second thing, of course, is more trivial than that. What do you mean social networks? So research has been done on people say we get our stuff not from the bad old media, bad old liberal conservative media. We get our stuff on Facebook, which is great. But people have been looking into it, and what did they find out? That people go into Facebook, and what do they read? Links to the bad old traditional media. And what's happening in the bad old traditional media in many cases in many countries around the world? Consolidation. Okay? Or you also get people who are in the publishing business know that the economies of the journalism have been deteriorated. In the United States, for instance, half of the journalists were laid off in the last 10 years. So social networks do not create investigative journalism. They will never create investigative journalism. They are just a platform. The people who create this investigative journalism, who hold the powerful to account, this is an industry where they laid off 50% of the people.
It says here, why is the media important? And I guess I share your view that it's extremely important that the public would be well informed and not ignorant of the important economic issues. So yes, in this sense, the media is important, but when I actually look at the Israeli media, when it comes at least to the economic issues, it actually makes the public ignored of the issues and not understand the issues. If I look even in the economic newspapers, they give a platform to politicians that just say completely wrong things without any criticism. I mean, for instance, the one politician that I did see in your slides, Sheli Yachimovich, it's very hard to open the marker without seeing her picture and what she said. Now, at least the marker sometimes also criticizes what she says. For instance, showing us the true social democratic model in contrast to the complete nonsense she has to say. But in the general media in Israel, you open the radio, you look at TV, they just completely align with the Yachimovich approach, which is just making the Israeli public stupid and doesn't understand economics and is willing, therefore, that there is accepting the fact that the politicians do terrible things to protect small interest groups against the public because they think it's okay. It's fine that imports are blocked to Israel because that's great for employment. That's the type of nonsense that the media is brainwashing us.
Okay, so actually, I didn't have enough time, but the next 20 slides basically are dedicated only to the shortcomings of media. And so we start with looking at the normative idea, the public interest model of media, which is sort of comes as a direct from what I explained to you, that media, as Omer said, can be a great tool to overcome the collective action and the free rider problem and make people informed about those issues and hold the people accountable. But the problem is, and this is media versus special interest, what we'd like to see. But what actually happens is that if we look at the business of media very quickly and how media is deteriorating, okay, And so this is a lecture that usually I dedicate 2 hours or 3 hours for that. And this is why media fails us continuously, time and again. So one of the ways of getting informed about how democracy works, how special interest groups works, and how politician works group is to understand how all the biases of media, taking all the economics approach of public choice, Omer, and what we say about politicians and regulators and why they serve special interests, and looking at media, how actually it perpetuates the same kind of behavior or copies it, the same kind of behavior. Why? Because if special interests understand that ideas matter, first of all, they want to capture politicians and to capture regulators. And second, they understand that they have to capture or influence media. It's the same story. Public choice can be looked at the political and regulatory framework, and we can take it also to media. So what kind of biases we have in the media? We have the ownership bias. You know, this is trivial. When you have monopolists or parties, politicians controlling media, you know what kind of media do you get. Then we have the advertiser's bias. What happens when you have a concentrated economy, going back to the question about antitrust, and there are only few advertisers, what kind of reporting are you going to get? Or when you have only 2 banks that give loans to all the newspapers and TV channels, what kind of journalism that you get? And in Israel, until very recently, all newspapers and TV channels had huge debt to the banks. Funny thing happened in the last months. We found out that the people in Israel who were the biggest single borrowers from the bank duopoly were also the people who controlled newspapers, the same group of people. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. The biggest personal bankruptcy in the history of Israel that happened last month, is going to be in court next week, is of a businessman that controlled 2 of the major newspapers in Israel. Is that a coincidence? I think not. Okay, his ability to get so much loans without guarantees from the banks, and to go out with such a spectacular bankruptcy after he's not been paying his debts for many, many years, had to do maybe with his political clout. And political clout, and media can give you a lot of political clout. Then, of course, you have the source bias, that newspapers, like regulators and like politicians, depend on the people that they give them information. They are the ones supplying information, then you are biased to the people who give you information. And then, of course, there is the ideological bias, okay? This is it. Since all your readers are right-wing, what do they want, or left-wing? What is it that they want when they open a newspaper? Do they want to hear other opinions? Well, that's theory. Let me tell you. You want to hear, you're going to get reinforcement from your newspaper. Okay? So economists have been looking into that. Andrei Schleifer, that I mentioned, has been looked a lot at this, and so that newspapers tend to reinforce their beliefs because smart salespeople at newspapers find out that if you are a left-wing, a liberal, or a conservative, you want to read in your newspapers what you think and not what you don't think. Okay? And there is a lot of research done. One of the most important economists that got the Clark Medal 2 years ago actually proved it in a series of papers. Now, as for Sheli Yachimowicz, we know Omer Moav's opinion on Sheli Yachimowicz. We read it a lot. This is a point. This is a subject that Omer and I agree on. I wrote about Yachimowicz's support of what I call the independent tax militias. I call them monopolies in Israel, not monopolies. It's sort of boring. I call them the independent tax militias. This is nice. George likes it. And this means that they are not really selling anything or producing. They are just levying tax on the dispersed taxpayers and consumers. But again, you know, one thing about Sheli Yachimowicz is for sure. Sheli Yachimowicz was introduced one thing that is important. You know, for many years, politicians in Israel didn't want to talk about economics. They said, ניכנס לשטחים, נצא מהשטחים. only right and left, only those issues. And, she said, you know what, let's also talk about economics. But actually, this is funny, I don't see a lot of opposition in politics to those ideas. And why? Because even people from the other parties, the opposing parties, in a way are not that different from Yachimowicz when it comes to the independent tax militias, the special interest groups. I very rarely see any politician whatsoever talking about those issues. So I know you like Yachimowicz, you developed a special kind of relationship. You cannot get a divorce anymore. You're sort of married to her. I mean publicly in you to make a good show together. But actually, when you look at some people from the Likud, they've been supporting the exact same protection to those independent tax militias in the last decade or so. Thank you very much.